3 things that you need to know before you start GLP-1 medication, although this is also relevant if you just started it, but you need to know this if you're on it or thinking of starting any GLP-1 medication, Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro. My name is Azim and I work for Embla. Number 1, GLP-1s are not a fat melting drug. So previously we've had weight loss medications that may alter your metabolism. We've had drugs that we've actually been able to prescribe as a doctor, like I can, where we don't absorb the fat that you eat. So you're just essentially not eating a whole macronutrient, reducing the amount of calories, you just excrete the fat right out. GLP-1s are not like that. They work technically as an appetite suppressant. So they move food slower through your stomach, so you feel fuller for longer. So imagine eating a normal sized meal, but you will feel for hours afterwards like you ate a humongous meal because that food is just going to sit there in the stomach. They also act on the brain and on the gut to reduce your craving. So after you eat or even in between, you don't feel like snacking as much and you don't feel like binging as much. But if you think about that, that means that it's not a fat melting drug. It's really a behavioral drug because it's going to change the way that you eat. It's going to change the choices that you make. If you feel really full, you're not going to want to eat those snacks. If you feel really full, you're not going to want to eat after an hour or 2. If you don't have the cravings for junk food or binging, you're not going to binge. You're not going to eat in between. And essentially then allows you to make better choices. But this can also be a bad thing. And let me explain why. If you take a GLP-1 medication with the sole purpose of just dropping weight as quickly as possible, it will work because it's for all of the reasons that I've just mentioned. You're going to lose weight, you're going to eat less, and you're going to lose weight. But if you don't use this like golden ticket opportunity to actually change the choices that you make, to actually change the behavior that your behavior when it comes to food, then you're going to lose the weight. But you're then left with 2 options. You're either going to have to keep going up in dose until you get to the highest dose, or you're going to have to stay, and then you're going to have to stay on the drug forever. Or if you ever stop the medication, you're going to get a horrible rebound. And I'll explain why. If you don't change the habits, or if you don't look at the food that you're eating and make sensible choices around those foods, because the GLP-1 medication is going to do its job, you're going to eat less food. But you're still going to work against your body in the sense that if you eat junk food, if you eat a lot of unhealthy food that's not high in satiety, food that doesn't keep you full, you're kind of working against the medication. The medication is working to keep you full so that you can make better choices. It's working to reduce your cravings so you can make better choices. It's working to reduce your insulin resistance so you can make better choices. And if you eat just rubbish food, it's going to do the opposite of all those things, right? So, takeaways, junk foods, all the sort of bad things that we shouldn't eat, ultra-processed foods, fine in moderation. But if you've never worked out how to learn moderation, then eating an abundance of those foods whilst on GLP-1, you're going to eat less of them, but they're going to still not keep you as full as healthy choices. They're not going to reduce your insulin resistance. And so you're going to get this thing where you're working kind of against that. Someone's giving you this medication as a kind of like, for the first time ever, a way to make weight loss, healthy weight loss, sustainable weight loss easier. And you're like going, okay, well, I'm just going to work against this. And so what that's going to do is you're going to need higher doses of the drug as your body builds up tolerance because you're not working with it, you're working against it. And once you get to the highest dose, there's sort of a question of what happens then, because if you keep eating in that way and working against the drug, maybe even the highest dose eventually is not going to really work in the way that you want it to. The highest dose is also going to give you more side effects, or the risk of more side effects, and then a larger chance and probability that you come off the medication. And now imagine you've suddenly come off the medication, that golden ticket that you've been given has been snatched away, and if all of the choices that you've made while you've been on the medication have been poor ones, how easy is it going to be to just continue with that, but now eating double the amount of volume? And all that weight loss is going to come straight back, but in the wrong way. It's going to come back as fat, and you're actually going to end up with a higher fat mass than when you started and probably a worse body composition. So the first thing to note is the choices that you make whilst you're on GLP-1 medications are really important. Use the opportunity that the medication gives you to make really, really sensible decisions that you would have struggled with before because you didn't have the extra support of the GLP-1. But the medication is the support. You've now got an opportunity to make the kind of choices. And if you need help in it, of course, and that's what we do. That's what we do at Embla. We give you that support, that coaching that you need to understand what foods are going to help augment, support the GLP-1 that you're working with so that your results are even better. Number 2, as you lose weight on GLP-1s, you lose muscle. Now, if you're thinking, I never wanted to be Arnold Schwarzenegger anyway, don't really care about muscle, you'll be wrong. Muscle is your metabolic health. Muscle is really, really important to your overall health and maintaining weight loss. Now, every diet that you do, you will lose muscle, but GLP-1 in the early research seems to lose more muscle than we were originally expecting. In some studies, it shows up to, out of the 100% of weight loss that you lose, up to 60% of that could be muscle. And that's a really, really bad thing for your metabolic health. I've already touched on insulin resistance in this video, but insulin resistance is, and if you're living with obesity, there's a very, very strong probability that you are insulin resistant. And it's outside the scope of this video, but insulin resistance is, if you have it, is something that is really, really makes it really hard for you to lose weight. And if you think I'm not diabetic, so I don't have insulin resistance, that's not necessarily true. People start developing insulin resistance years before they become diabetic. And actually the lab tests that we have to test you for diabetes, they only test you for diabetes. They test your blood glucose, not your insulin levels. So you could be living with silent insulin resistance years before. And so what happens is, muscle is great for insulin resistance. Muscle soaks up insulin, it takes it in, and it soaks up glucose, and it takes it in. And so insulin shuttles your glucose into your muscle cells. The more muscle you have and the more metabolically healthy your muscle is, the more it can soak up that glucose, the more metabolically healthy your body works. Other hormones work well as well. When you're insulin resistant, the muscle's closed, it's resistant to the insulin. So insulin can't shuttle glucose into those cells. And what it then does is just sink it into fat cells. And you end up in this vicious cycle where fat cells then make inflammation worse and insulin resistance worse and leptin resistance, which is to do with your appetite, worse. So whilst GLP-1 is helping you lose weight on the scale, great. If you're losing a whole bunch of muscle with it, long-term again, and we run into long-term problems again here, we're going to end up in a worse place than when we started, especially if you ever come off the medication. You lost muscle and fat. If you regain weight after coming off the medication, you're going to regain just fat. And so metabolic health is super important, and muscle is super important. And it's not just for the bodybuilders. It's not for the people who just go to the gym. Retaining that muscle is key to maintaining your weight loss. If you are losing weight on GLP-1 and preserving muscle, you're going a really, really long way towards keeping that weight off, maybe even to the point where you don't need to be on medication. And that involves lots of different things. Again, things that we do here at Embla, which is prioritizing your protein, understanding how to prioritize your metabolic health and your muscle preservation, incorporating forms of movement and resistance training in an easy way, especially people who have poor joints hurt, movement's difficult. There are ways to incorporate that and preserve muscle health. And that's the second big thing that you need to understand if you're thinking about starting GLP-1s. And finally, number 3, and I've touched on this already, more is not necessarily good. So with GLP-1s, if you're shooting up to the highest dose, that's not necessarily a good thing. It might accelerate the weight loss on the scales, and in the short term, you can see the trend of this video is short versus long, that might seem like a good thing. But when you get to the highest dose, that's when the side effects get their highest as well. Obviously, we don't know about the long-term effects of people being on the highest dose for years and years yet either. And you'll also get to a point where, again, if you haven't necessarily made the right choices, you kind of reach the end. What do you do at that point? If weight loss starts to plateau and you're on the highest dose, then what? So if you start taking into consideration points 1 and 2, where you're making the right choices, you're eating the right things, you are supporting yourself with the medication by making those right food choices that keep you fuller for longer, doing the same things that the medication do. I mean, we can eat foods that mimic the same things that GLP-1s do. We can eat foods that keep us fuller for longer. We can eat foods that don't necessarily spike our glucose too much and cause and worsen our insulin resistance. We can do that. And so if you're doing that alongside GLP-1, you don't necessarily need to move up to the next dose. You can keep yourself on a lower dose, and that has so many benefits because number 1, it gives you scope if you ever do need to move up. And number 2, it reduces the risk of side effects. And a lot of people drop off GLP-1s because of side effects. So if you are keeping on maybe the second lowest or third lowest dose, the risk of you having to come off the medication because the side effects are so intolerable is really low. And it also means that if you do get to that point where you've lost a good amount of weight, fat, hopefully, not muscle, and you've retained muscle and you're feeling good and you're feeling healthy, you might even be able to start coming down off the medication. And that brings in other costs, like maybe the actual cost of the medication or not wanting to be on medication for the rest of your life and feeling healthier. So there is a massive, massive advantage to, again, and it kind of links back to point number one on this, to doing the right things, making the right choices, learning how your metabolic health and your body and your health in general works, so that you can support yourself on GLP-1 and not move up to the highest dose. There is a tendency for people to think higher is better and just shoot up to the highest dose, thinking that that's going to get them the fastest weight loss results. But like we said, GLP-1s are not necessarily fat burning drugs. So the highest dose may give you the impression that you're just losing the most amount of weight, but what it's probably doing is just restricting your eating so much, keeping you so full, reducing the amount that you want to eat so much that essentially you're just electively starving yourself. And we know from history that a starvation method of diet doesn't ever work long term. So more is not necessarily better, and less may actually be more. And so keeping on a lower dose could be a good thing for GLP-1s, because it means you're doing the right things alongside it and you don't need to necessarily move up. So those are 3 things that you need to think about if you're thinking of starting a GLP-1, or maybe if you're already on it and you're on a medium dose and some of this is resonating with you. If any of this interests you, then please leave a comment, like, subscribe, reach out to us on the Embla app. It's free to download. There's recipes, there are articles, resources, all sorts of things to help you in your weight loss journey. I hope this was useful, and I'll see you all very soon.